Welcome to the Two Wars channel. Despite the Germans underestimating the Romanians and thinking they didn't make good soldiers, Romania was one of the largest allies of the Third Reich. There is plenty of material written based on the memoirs of Wehrmacht soldiers and officers, so this time I decided to talk about an interview with a Romanian soldier who also witnessed the events of that large-scale war. Our hero is from Bessarabia. He was born in 1919 and at the age of 14 he enrolled in an agricultural school. But he never managed to finish his studies. During his final exams, the Great Patriotic War began. Despite the fact that the hero of the video was of conscription age, he wasn't drafted at the beginning of the war because he was from Bessarabia. Besides that, the situation on the front was relatively favorable for the Axis forces, so there was no particular need for human resources. But after the winter of 1941 and the failure of Operation Typhoon to capture the Soviet capital, the situation changed dramatically, and the hero of the video was drafted into the army. He was a simple soldier in an anti-tank platoon. How did it happen that someone from a wealthy family with a good education for those times was an ordinary soldier and not an officer?
I was offered to enroll in officer school, but none of us from Bessarabia aspired to become officers. I personally never wanted to pursue a military career either. I've always enjoyed farming, that's the work I love. For several months, we trained and prepared, and only in March or April of '43 were we sent to the front. It took another 2-3 weeks to get there. Eventually, we ended up in the bend of the Don. But the first serious battle happened beyond the Don, because the aviation and artillery worked very effectively. The Soviet soldiers were retreating, and we were pursuing them. The pontoon engineers built a crossing over the Don, and only beyond it, 100 kilometers away, did the tank battle begin.
You might be surprised by the words of the Romanian veteran about the retreat of Red Army soldiers in 1943. In fact, this was possible, considering that the very important Battle of Kursk was still ahead. The Soviet command acted quite wisely by not spreading their forces across different sections of the front and instead concentrating their strength in one direction.
Yes, I took out several tanks, but how did we operate? With my Czechoslovakian ZB anti-tank rifle, I aimed at the track, it would turn, and then the second rifle would hit it in the rear, causing the engine to catch fire. The tank crew would either flee, die, or be taken prisoner.
The essence of this tactic was to immobilize the tank and then finish it off with a more powerful weapon. This strategy was used for several reasons. Firstly, the Romanians themselves wrote that they experienced a shortage of heavy weapons and ammunition for them. They attribute their defeat at Stalingrad to this, when the Red Army forces broke through their flanks. Secondly, it must be understood that the armor of some Soviet tanks, such as the KV-1 and KV-2, was very difficult to damage even with a powerful gun.
No, my own rifle was enough for me. The Germans were almost always on wheels, while we mostly walked. And I carried that bandolier in a case on my shoulder. But carrying it was no pleasure. At rest stops, we would collapse from exhaustion and fall asleep. Sometimes, we were so tired that we didn't even feel like eating.
Although the author never had to use Soviet trophies, many Germans highly valued them. The PPSH and SVT were particularly popular.
Hot meals were very rarely delivered because there were severe frosts, and everything cooled down on the way. And the bread would freeze to such an extent that it was impossible to eat, so they gave us crackers instead. We didn't get any alcohol at the front. Only on Christmas and Easter did they arrange a festive dinner, giving out 50 grams of spirits, a glass of wine, roast, and Easter cake.
Problems with food and supplies were especially severe for the Axis troops in the winter of 1941. This happened because the Germans were relying on blitzkrieg and did not prepare their supply system for a prolonged war. The situation was so extremely bad that some German units didn't even have severe winter clothing.
It was very difficult, especially since we were poorly dressed. We had a coat, a sweater, pants, and a few hats, but they were very flimsy. My socks, woolen and knitted from home. I remember I had 4 pairs. We were constantly freezing, lighting fires right in the trenches. This frost, half-starved state, mud, and those lice, they were constantly eating us alive. When they started the fire, everyone gathered around the campfire and shook out their clothes and hats into it, and it sounded like gunfire, so loudly they popped. You know, in the rare free time at the front, everyone tried to take care of themselves somehow. They didn't even try to talk or sleep, but the main thing was to wash, shave, and wash their clothes. Very poor. Houses covered with reeds, straw, poverty and devastation everywhere. When we passed through the settlements, we hardly interacted with anyone because everyone was hiding and running away. I believe that the Germans would have won this war if they hadn't behaved the way they did towards people, if they hadn't terrorized the common folk. Wherever they occupied territories, they immediately caused destruction, captured communists, and tormented them along with ordinary people. And when the people saw all this, resistance began, and the partisan movement emerged. The partisans blew up military depots, trains, and sometimes even attacked our troops. And here the Russian army did not surrender, and in the end, no one broke through beyond Stalingrad. But I didn't make it to Stalingrad either.
Despite the interview authors writing about the neglect of the local residents, the Romanian troops gained a bad reputation. Many witnesses who survived the war said that the Romanians treated the local population even worse than the Germans did. But he was absolutely right about the partisans. The partisan movement became a huge problem for the supply system, significantly undermining the combat capability of the Wehrmacht and its allies.
Yes, there were very difficult days. There were moments when the Russians tried to surround us and everything was very tense. The greatest danger was being captured by the Russians. It was like that all the way during the retreat until we crossed the pond and found ourselves in Romania. It was a great joy. Everyone was happy to be alive. After that, everyone went their separate ways. We arrived at the station, but the train had neither a locomotive nor anything else. The station master announced there would be nothing and everyone left. Some were lucky to get a ride on a cart, some went on foot, each to their own destination with great difficulty. But I made it to Râmnicu Sărat. When I reunited with my family, it was the happiest moment of the entire war. But at that time, chaos reigned throughout the country. Passenger trains were almost non-existent. So I stayed with my wife for 2 months. And only in November, when the situation had more or less stabilized, I was able to leave for Craiova, the permanent location of our unit. I arrived at the regiment and there were almost no officers left. The highest ranking one was the deputy commander of the regiment. And he announced to us, "You are free." The Russians issued an order allowing the people from Bessarabia and Bukovina to leave the Romanian army and return home. Fortunately, I had a place to return to, but many had nowhere to go. So I returned to Râmnicu Sărat, and that was the end of my front. I did not fight against the Germans in the west.
An interesting fact is that after the coup in Romania, they turned their weapons against their former German allies. Of course, this was done out of fear of the Soviet Union.
Yes, sometimes I have nightmares about the war, but very rarely. Actually, you've stirred up my memories now, and I've been wanting to forget all about this for a long time.
Share your opinion, like, and subscribe to my channel. All of this will greatly help its promotion.